for mutual acceptance and existence. It is not to kill and be killed, but rather to live and let live. That is the only path towards shared peace and security. The choice is simple: between occupation and freedom, annexation and independence, apartheid and dignity of universal rights, oppression and coexistence, a choice between war and peace. The current Israeli government has made a choice. It is obvious from the statements of its representatives, from the actions of its leaders, occupation forces and settlers. It is the wrong choice for all. And that is why, whatever action you take or fail to take are so important, because what happens next will determine which path we are on. For generations to come, we will do our part, but we cannot do it alone, nor can we do it for long if this continues. We are running out of time. The fate of the region cannot be left to be decided by those blinded by hate and fanatic ideology. It has to be determined by the law, by reason, by regard for all human lives, by respect for our rights and our common humanity, and by the quest for shared peace and security. We call on all states to act for protection of civilians, recognition of the State of Palestine and its admission as a full member in the United Nations, implementation of the ICJ advisory opinion, respect for international legal obligations without exception, without fear or favor. We call on them to act decisively to end settlement activities in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, including by taking actions against the Israeli officials responsible before we see settlements built yet again in Gaza. We call on them to support initiatives for just and lasting peace through actions, not only words. A journalist asked me if it was realistic to expect an end of occupation when it was clear that the objective was permanent annexation. Asked me if it was realistic to speak of two-state solution when there was clearly no readiness on the Israeli government side to ever accept an independent Palestinian state. Asked me if it was realistic to speak of coexistence while a genocide was underway. My answer is that the only alternative to an end of occupation and the two-state solution and coexistence is perpetual war, ever more deadly. What is unrealistic is to think that oppressing an entire nation will lead to peace and security. What is unrealistic is to continue the same policies that have been tried for decades, yet expect a different outcome. What is unrealistic is to think that one side can simply eliminate the other. We warned then and we warn again of where this path leads us to. We have seen it time and time again. We are witnessing it now. We cannot allow for this to continue any longer. A different path is possible if we reject this self-inflicted powerlessness. Being realistic means refusing to surrender to a reality of death and destruction, of occupation and conflict, of hate and war, instead working together to chart a path that ends this genocide, ends this occupation, and ensures that our collective will for freedom, justice, and peace prevails over that reality. We will work with all of you to chart this irreversible path forward. And the first indispensable step is an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. We appeal to this Council to act now, and I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Permanent Observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week, we had the honor and privilege to accompany Ayelet Samerano here in the UN and stand by her as she spoke about her son, Yonatan. Ayelet has spoken many times of her son, his passion, enthusiasm, his love for the earth and all its creatures, his smile, his laugh, his love of life. As Ayelet said, Yonatan is a life, and the life is Yonatan. That life was stolen by a monster on the UN payroll. As seen on the video, Yonatan was thrown into the back of a truck and taken back to Gaza by an UNRWA employee. The monster who robbed the Samerano family of their son, of his smile, of his embrace, was cashing checks signed and sealed by the United Nations and the UNRWA Commissioner General. To say that Ayelet's pain is agonizing is a monumental understatement. Yet she has received no apology from the UN, no explanation, no any expression of regret. The fact that this is not the topic of today's discussion, that a UN employee brutally kidnapped an Israeli civilian, is beyond me. It is not as if this is a surprise. After all, we have provided hundreds of names and Hamas IDs of UNRWA employees involved in the October 7 massacre. We have exposed many senior UNRWA employees who were Hamas terrorists, and many senior Hamas terrorists who were UNRWA employees. How does this not anger you all? So many of you, not all of you, are UNRWA's largest donors. You give your money and resources to the United Nations and UNRWA, rightfully assuming it would be used for education and social services. Are you not outraged that it has been used to terrorize innocent? Are you not livid at the desecration of the UN's lofty ideals? Before looking outward, one must look to their own house. Because if you truly want to lay the groundwork for regional peace, there must first be a change in the UN's modus operandi in the region. No more incitement of hatred, no more teaching of violence, and no more money for terrorism. Commissioner Lazzarini himself recently admitted that UNRWA's contributions to current humanitarian efforts could be replaced, and I quote, "without a doubt." Well, take him at his word and help us turn a new page for the betterment of all involved. Yonatan is still in Gaza, along with 100 other hostages. Israel will never abandon them, never stop fighting for their freedom. The Council can and must help condemn Hamas, demand their immediate and unconditional release, turn your focus onto the terrorist organization exploiting Gazan civilians as a tool for the extermination of Israel. While we fight for the freedom of our hostages and continue to combat terrorists across Gaza, we will not falter in our extensive humanitarian efforts. Only last week, I shared our immense efforts since October. In the past 6 days alone, those efforts continue without relent. For example, last week, over 100 aid trucks entered Gaza through the Kerem Shalom and Kisufim crossings, as well as the Erez crossing in the north. On that same day, 15 trucks of goods from the UAE delivered to the Ashdod port and entered to northern Gaza. This was their second such shipment. It included over 2,000 pallets of water, medical equipment, shelter supplies, and hygiene products. Along with delivering aid, we have ensured the maintenance of essential infrastructure, 11 hospitals currently operate in Gaza, and additional 14 field hospitals. Meanwhile, we have protected access to water across the Strip. In northern Gaza alone, 112 liters are available per person per day. I am also happy to report that 50 trucks were collected on the Gazan side by international agencies. However, almost 900 remain uncollected as the aid wastes away. Our discussions require refocusing across all aspects, but our debates on the humanitarian efforts in Gaza are in particular need. While Israel facilitates the entrance of hundreds of aid trucks weekly via many crossings, there has been a failure of agencies to collect that aid. While we flood Gaza with aid, there is a drought of distribution. We will continue to fulfill our duties, but the UN and international organizations must step up in this respect. Not only must the UN step up to its aid distribution obligations, but the focus must also shift to Hamas's constant hijacking of humanitarian aid to feed their machine of terror and misery. Let me give you an example. 48 hours ago, together with other organizations, and UNRWA will verify what I'm telling you now, we coordinated the entry of more than 100 aid trucks which crossed Kerem Shalom crossing into Gaza. 97 of those trucks were violently looted by Hamas, with the drivers held at gunpoint. 97 out of 100 trucks. This is an example of the immensely challenging reality that we are facing. We will continue with our efforts, despite the Council continuing to ignore the true cause of the situation, Hamas and its violent greed. Week after week, some at this table villainize and demonize Israel, but your failure to identify the crimes of Hamas against the Gazan people exposes your true agenda, your true bias, and the blinding hatred that lies behind it. Colleagues, Israel is under attack on 7 fronts, including from our northern border, after Hezbollah made the decision to enter the war on October 8 in solidarity with their Hamas terrorist comrades. They fired over 15,000 rockets, missiles, anti-tank missiles, drones, and other such weapons at our civilian population. As a result, 70,000 of our civilians have been made internal refugees. Israel has been perfectly clear on what it takes to restore calm. First, Hezbollah must withdraw to the north of the Litani River, as outlined in Resolution 1701. Southern Lebanon must be freed of Iranian proxies, per Resolution 1559. No other country at this table would accept 70,000 of their civilians being displaced by a terrorist organization. No other country at this table would take any different steps than Israel. No other country would lie down and agree to that terrorist organization remaining on their border. The international community must join us in our efforts to restore Lebanese sovereignty to southern Lebanon, freeing the Lebanese people of their Iranian masters and enforcing the resolutions of this very council. Mr. President, there is a string connecting all of these crises, a common thread which has spilled blood in every corner of the Middle East. It is the same thread that runs a railway of death through Syria and into Lebanon, supplying and training Hezbollah terrorists to carry out their murderous goals. It is the same thread that armed and bolstered Hamas to commit the October 7 atrocities. The same threads destabilizing Iraq and Syria. The same thread that directs the Houthis in their attacks against international maritime trade. Iranian officials have themselves acknowledged their relationship with the Houthis. Their sponsorship of terror is not an open secret among nations. Iran shouted from the rooftop. In a report delivered to you last month, it was revealed that Iran's funds and weapons have transformed the Houthis into a military force, evidenced by hundreds of indiscriminate attacks against merchant ships, as well as UK and US warships over the last year. Now that global threat is steaming towards obtaining nuclear capabilities, we cannot and will not allow that to happen. Iran dreams of a vision of domination made possible by a nuclear arsenal. Iran's nuclear ambitions pose a threat not only to Israel, but to every member state of the UN. We all know that a nuclear-armed Iran would not hesitate to rain down destruction not yet witnessed. Confronting this global existential threat requires a coalition of the courageous. This Council must set the tone, condemn the Ayatollah's regime, impose crippling sanctions, and work with us to draw a line in the sand so the Middle East might heal from the damage Iran has caused. Mr. President, this is a moment for decisive action. The Council must rise to its purpose and address the true instigator of instability in the Middle East. Iran's blood-stained ambitions will only end when we collectively say enough. Before concluding, I must mention the efforts to pass a resolution in this Council which fails to outline the release of the hostages as a condition of a ceasefire. Such a decision would be a betrayal, not only of Israel, but of the 101 families and their loved ones being tormented by terrorist monsters. This includes Jonathan Samerano and his family, to whom the United Nations owed an unpayable debt. Israel will defend its people. We will never abandon our hostages, never forget them, and never stop fighting for them. That's why we started this war, I remind you. Make no mistake, history will remember who stood with us to uphold peace and justice and who allowed terror to flourish. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for their statements. I now give the floor to the representative of Lebanon.
السيد الرئيس.
Mr. President, it is my honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab Group. At the outset, the Arab Group thanks the United Kingdom, the President of the Security Council this month, for holding this open debate on the situation in the Middle East. We welcome the Secretary of State, Mr. David Lammy, presiding over this council. We thank the briefers for their valuable briefing. We welcome honorable ministers to this session. Mr. President, this discussion is held 1 week following the Arab Islamic Summit held in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, presided over by the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. 1 week following the sounding of the alarm that famine is imminent in northern Gaza. We meet again today as Israel continues its genocidal war in Gaza, and as UN agencies confirm that Gaza is no longer Gaza has become inhabitable. We also meet at a time when Israel continues its aggression on Lebanon and its blatant violations of its territory and sovereignty, and as Israel continues to violate the territories of the Syrian Arab Republic. Mr. President, the Arab Group once again calls upon your august council to stop the brutal Israeli aggression on Gaza and Lebanon, to end the dangerous Israeli violations of the UN Charter, international law, and the international humanitarian law. We warn against any escalation in the region and its international and regional repercussions. We warn against the expansion of the aggression that has gone beyond Gaza and included Lebanon without the United Nations taking decisive action and with the failure of the international legitimacy. We stress the need for the Security Council to shoulder its responsibility today and take a binding resolution under Chapter 7 to compel Israel, the occupying power, to agree to a ceasefire in Gaza and ensure the rapid, safe, and unhindered access to enough sufficient humanitarian assistance to all regions in the Strip. And we stress the total rejection of forced displacement of Palestinian citizens and our rejection of any attempt to divide occupied Palestinian territories, especially in Gaza, or introduce any demographic or geographic change therein. Mr. President, the Arab Group condemns the collective punishment policy adopted by Israel and its use of blockade and starvation as a weapon against civilians in the Gaza Strip. We stress the need to compel Israel to fully withdraw from the Gaza Strip and open all border crossings between Israel and the Gaza Strip. It's also important to lift restrictions impeding the safe, unhindered, and rapid humanitarian access. We condemn the adoption by the Israeli Knesset of racist, illegitimate laws against UNRWA. We stress that these resolutions and laws are null and void. Once again, we support the UNRWA, and we call upon all states to provide effective financial and political support to this agency. We strongly condemn the Israeli horrific crimes in Gaza, which are part of the genocide and ethnic cleansing campaign, especially in northern Gaza in the past few weeks. We call upon the Security Council to establish an independent, credible international commission of inquiry to investigate these crimes and take serious steps to prevent the destruction of evidence in order to ensure that the perpetrators are held accountable and do not enjoy impunity. We also call upon your august council and the international community to take the necessary resolutions, including by imposing sanctions to stop the escalatory Israeli measures, which are illegitimate in the occupied West Bank, which are impeding the two-state solution and the prospects of a just and comprehensive peace. We condemn the terrorist attacks by Israeli settlers against Palestinian citizens and their property, which are escalating in a systematic way because of the support and arming of the Israeli occupation government. We stress the need to maintain the legal and historic status quo of the holy sites in occupied Jerusalem.
السيد الرئيس تدين المجموعة.
Mr. President, the Arab Group condemns in the strongest term the ongoing Israeli aggression against Lebanon, the violation of its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and calls for an immediate ceasefire and the full implementation of Resolution 1701. The Arab Group condemns the deliberate targeting of the Lebanese army and its sites that killed and injured many among its ranks. It condemns the killing of civilians, the systematic destruction of residential areas, and the forced displacement of individuals. There are more than 1.2 million internally displaced people in Lebanon. It condemns the targeting of UNIFIL and the repeated attacks on the vicinity of heritage sites in Lebanon that are listed on UNESCO list of World Heritage, particularly in Baalbek and Tir, reiterating the need to protect these cultural and historic sites. The Arab Group condemns the escalating Israeli aggression on the territories of the Syrian Arab Republic, including the targeting of civilians, the destruction of civilian buildings and infrastructure, and the violation of its sovereignty, constituting grave crimes and violations of the international law and relevant UN resolutions, reiterating the need to end the Israeli occupation of the occupied Syrian Golan. Mr. President, the Arab Group looks forward to the Conference on Humanitarian Aid that will be hosted by Cairo on the 2nd of December 2024. In the context of efforts to provide adequate humanitarian aid to the Strip, we reiterate our support to the tremendous efforts made by Egypt, Qatar, in cooperation with the U.S. to achieve an immediate and lasting ceasefire in Gaza Strip and the release of hostages and prisoners. It holds Israel the responsibility for failure of these efforts as a result of the backing away by the Israeli government from agreements that were reached by the negotiators. Mr. President, in conclusion, the Arab Group calls upon the international community to fully implement the advisory opinion issued by the ICJ on the 19th of July 2024 towards the ending of the Israeli occupation and its implications, and to pay reparations for the damages as soon as possible. It calls upon the international parties to launch a plan that has specific steps and timeframes under international auspices to end the occupation and realize the independent Palestinian state that is sovereign on the 4th of June 1967 borders with occupied Jerusalem as its capital on the basis of the two-state solution according to the relevant resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002. The Arab Group reiterates that the just and lasting comprehensive peace in the region cannot be achieved without the ending of the Israeli occupation of all Arab-occupied territories. We thank those countries that have recognized the State of Palestine and call the others to do the same. We reiterate the importance for the State of Palestine to join the UN as a full-fledged member. Mr. President, allow me now to deliver the following statements in my national capacity. Israel continues its aggression on Lebanon and its people, its violation of the UN Charter, the international law, and the international humanitarian law, as well as the relevant international resolutions, primarily Resolution 1701. Israeli forces continue to carry ground incursions on border villages with the aim of reoccupying them, destroying them, and creating a buffer, scorched, unlivable zone. According to the latest report by the World Bank, more than 100,000 residential units have been damaged partially or fully. The Special Rapporteur on the Right to Adequate Housing, Mr. Raja Jubal, concluded that what Israel is doing in Lebanon can be described as domicide, and that it does not wage a war only in Gaza and now in Lebanon, but rather a campaign of scorched earth policies that destroys all homes, mosques, schools, and signs of habitation. Israel continues the bombing of civilian establishments, emergency and healthcare centers, the vicinity of heritage sites, particularly in Tyre and Baalbek, that are listed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. More than 3,516 people are killed and 14,929 injured, including women, children, journalists, first responders, medical teams, as well as members of the Lebanese armies. The number of the forcibly displaced people exceeded 1.2 million. Israel continues its attacks on the Lebanese army and the UNIFIL. And here we ask the question, does Israel think that by targeting UNIFIL and the Lebanese army, they would contribute to finding solutions and achieve stability or the return of the displaced? Mr. President, according to the World Bank estimates, the total financial and economic losses to Lebanon has amounted to $8.5 billion. No one country can bear this tremendous burden, let alone Lebanon, that have been facing for the last 5 years countless crises. Lebanon has become the only country in the world that has refugees, displaced and internally displaced. Here we call again and repeat our call to the brotherly and friendly countries to stand alongside of Lebanon in this plight, and we point to the establishment of a fund that will be replenished by contributions from brotherly and friendly countries that will be under UN supervision so that the spending for reconstruction can come under credible international audit and oversight. Mr. President, the main thing is to stop the aggression and to cease the fire immediately. Israel's withdrawal from all occupied Lebanese territories and stopping the violations of the Lebanese sovereignty, the ongoing bombing, particularly of civilians and civilian areas, and the full implementation of Resolution 1701. We reiterate the need to hold Israel accountable for its countless crimes, and we reiterate our unwavering commitment to Resolution 1701 and to enhance our defense capacities to preserve our sovereignty and independence in the face of external ambitions and threats. We are committed to deploy the Lebanese army in the south so that it is the only legitimate authority south of Al-Litani River is the authority of the government of Lebanon, and that there is no weapon present without the approval of the government of Lebanon, according to Resolution 1701. We reiterate our support of UNIFIL. We rely on their active and primary role, according to their mandate, in cooperation and coordination with the Lebanese army to strengthen the extension of the state authority over all Lebanese territories within the internationally recognized borders. Mr. President, in conclusion, we recall what His Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigrants, Dr. Abdullah Abu Habib, said in his statement before the ministers of the Council of Arab and Muslim Ministers of Foreign Affairs last week. He said, have solutions through a ceasefire and a recommitment to the implementation of Resolution 1701 are much better than the continuation of the war. However, the shortest solution to lasting peace in south of Lebanon comes through complete solutions, comprehensive solutions. That means that as long as Israel continues its violations by land, by sea, by air of Lebanon's sovereignty, and as long as they avoid acknowledging the international borders that were recognized and demarcated between Lebanon and Palestine in 1923 and confirmed by the Lebanese-Israeli Armistice Agreement of 1949 under the auspices and supervision of the UN, the more Israel sows the seeds for future wars that we so tirelessly work to avoid. Anyone who wants to live in peace and security with their environment in the region, including with Lebanon that embraced peace in the Beirut Arab Summit of 2002 as a strategic option and adopted the Arab Peace Initiative that was proposed by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Anyone who wants that should stop the violations definitively and end the occupation of Lebanese territories. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Lebanon for their statement. There are still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting. I intend, with the concurrence of members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until 4:30 tomorrow afternoon. I'm grateful in particular to the interpreters for enabling us to go significantly beyond our time today. The meeting is suspended.